Hi class. Today we will be teaching you a bit about the 50s, not only the social change, but pop culture.
Not only that, but all the major people that really influenced the generation, especially the teenagers.
The word teenager was rarely used before the 1950s, however it was reintroduced to the nation in the 50s due to the tremendous population of those in this age category and because teenagers started gaining more independence and freedoms. Teens were able to buy more things like food, clothes and music because of an increase in spending money. Teenagers were also becoming more independent in the type of music they preferred to listen to, no more listening to what their parents preferred. Teens flocked to the new music of the decade, which was rock and roll.
That's true. Growing up as a teenager prior to World War II, teenagers were expected to take life seriously. Males were expected to join the military or go out and get a job in order to help bring in money for their family or to take care of their future family. Females were taught how to take care of the household and prepare themselves to be a dutiful wife and take care of children. Marriage and preparing for a family, more than education or a career, was seen as a definite in the lives of teenagers. Also, teens had very little economic freedom, independence, and input into decision-making prior to World War II. However, in the 1950s, expectations changed for the teenager. The economy started booming and families experienced a great deal of economic power, freedom and independence, including teenagers.
Yes, things were starting to change. In the 1950s, teenagers were more inclined and encouraged to attend college, find a skill, and seek a successful career. Their parents had more than likely gone through the Depression and a number of wars, and now wanted something more for their children. This resulted in teenagers receiving spending money and having more time to socialize with other teenagers. Of course, this newly found independence would often result in conflict between the parents and the child. The media played on these emotions and often portrayed teenagers as juvenile delinquents. Peers easily influence teenagers. Often at that stage in life, what peers think and do becomes more important than what parents think and say.
But teens weren't the only ones who were attracted to rock and roll, right? With the rise of rock and roll's new popularity, black artists were becoming more popular with audiences of all colors. In the early days of rock and roll, race records were sold mainly to black customers. This practice started to change as rock and roll became more popular with young people. Chuck Berry was one of the first black rock and roll performers to appeal to black and white audiences by combining the popular black rhythm and blues sound with rock and roll. His powerful guitar playing and energetic dancing thrilled audiences.
Elvis Presley had the greatest impact on early rock and roll. He was good-looking, had a unique sound, and delivered an electric performance that made teens swoon and parents shudder. Little Richard was another inventor of rock and roll. His wild performances, rebellious music, and over-the-top appearance made him popular with teenagers of all colors. He helped define early rock and roll and greatly influenced other groups who followed, including the Beatles and Rolling Stones. Buddy Holly's popularity rivaled Elvis Presley's. Holly was a singer, songwriter, and instrumentalist. He wrote and performed many of the hit songs of the 1950s. Sadly, his incredible career was cut short by a plane crash in 1959. His life story was made into a famous movie called The Buddy Holly Story.
But on to other things, like shows and films. There were a lot of famous shows in the 50s, such as I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners, The Adventures of Superman, The Twilight Zone and more. Millions of Americans abandoned the movie theater in favor of TV, and the future of the film industry was in doubt throughout the decade. Hollywood studios feared the worst as the New York-based television industry endangered the silver screen's very existence. But, as we all know, the movie business did survive. And during the 50s it even managed to ignore the latest in electronic competition long enough to produce some of the finest films of all time. The beginning of the decade saw the usual variety of film fare as Hollywood went about its business in 1950. Moviegoers could go see the movie Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, or explore the still popular noir genre like The Asphalt Jungle, panic in the streets, or perhaps choose to take the whole family out to see the year's #1 film, Cinderella.
Some famous actors and actresses were people like Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Lucille Bell, and James Dean. Some other famous people in the 50s were people such as Arthur Miller, the writer of The Crucible, and Ernest Hemingway, among others.
In the fashion industry for men, suits were becoming more narrow with narrow pants and a sack coat shape. Charcoal gray was popular. A white shirt was usually worn with this gray suit, along with a plain, narrow tie. Hats were losing popularity too.
And for females after World War II, there were some major fashion changes. The 1940s silhouette had wide shoulders and a short skirt, but the 1950s styles were hourglass in shape, fitted body with small shoulders, small waistline, full skirt and higher heels. At the end of the decade, a newer fashion look was becoming popular, later made popular by Jackie Kennedy. These things were cool: knee-length skirts, stockings, floral fabric, fitted tops and full skirts, full-length ball gowns, tight pants, long jumpers, stilettos, white blouses, wide skirts, high heels, hourglass short skirts.
In the realm of art, new forms of expression came into being. Jackson Pollock became famous for his drip paintings, which were nothing more than random paint drippings on canvas. The pieces were said to symbolize the spirit of the time, the philosophy of negating the past with spontaneous action in the present. Older pieces were met with criticism. Traditional paintings like Washington crossing the Delaware were seen with distaste. They were believed to be part of the national cliché and underappreciated. Despite their smaller economy, many were able to afford to purchase Pollock's paintings that neared $13,600 each. But many of them were unable to afford such artworks, and thus many art mobiles were created to display these fabulous works of art. These art mobiles were van-sanctioned to carry large expensive art paintings for the people to see. And finally we come to society as a whole and its different influences, like literature. The writings of the time did not replicate that of the post-war decade before it. Instead of writing about war as the survivors of World War I had, the citizens of the 1950s chose to write about anything but the war. They choose to denounce the common life and fostered rebellion and nonconformity with beatnik writers Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye would be based on the rebellious teens and post-war values. Sexually explicit writing reached a new peak with fiction like Peyton Place. The writings of the 1950s were heavily influenced by the Cold War,
and civil rights began rapid acceleration during the decade. African Americans that faced inequality desired the equality of the country. After the experiences of deeply disturbing prejudice, they wanted to be equal. In 1954, the Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson decision of separate but equal facilities and opened the door to all sorts of social integration in all aspects of life. The Montgomery bus boycott began with Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus when she decided to sit in the whites-only part of the bus. It provided activists with a reason to boycott, and they did. This began the career of Martin Luther King Jr. in the realm of civil rights in 1955.
We hope that you learned a lot, and that you can now grasp how important the 50s were to America and especially to the youth. We would like to leave you with a funny video of a band that liked to try and imitate the 50s. We hope you enjoy it.
We better get an A, Mr. Ryan. This took a lot of time. Bye.